Hello viewers, this is Dr. Qamar Cheema at the Snowbird Institute. Today we have a very important conversation about the Whither Islam in the age of great power politics, and we have a special guest with us, Mr. Akbar S. Ahmed, who is a Pakistani-American academic, author, poet, playwright, filmmaker, and a former diplomat. And he's currently a professor of international relations and holds the Ibn Khaldun Chair of the Islamic Studies at the American University School of International Service in Washington, D.C. Mr. Akbar S. Ahmed served as a Pakistan's High Commissioner to the UK and Ireland. Currently, he's a Global Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center. And at the same time, I have been joined by the Chairman Snowbird Institute, Ambassador Azaz Ahmed Chaur Sahab. Thank you very much, Akbar S. Ahmed Sahab and Azaz Chaur Sahab, for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. So today's topic, as I mentioned earlier, Whither Islam in the age of great power politics. It's a very interesting looking how the developments have been in the Middle East and how things have unfolded, particularly in the last 2 decades. So this topic is of significance for us to understand, and particularly Professor Akbar S. Ahmed, who has written a lot. So we requested him. I will first request Ambassador Azaz Ahmed Chaudhry to give opening remarks, sir, and then we will lead the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Qamar, and it's a great delight to once again host Ambassador Dr. Akbar S. Ahmed. As you rightly introduced him, he's many in one, and I've had the greatest of pleasures of interacting with him when I was myself in DC. And I know that all his life he has been a doer, and he's seen as a civil servant how Pakistan rose in the 60s and how it handled the crises that it did. And then he became a diplomat, our High Commissioner to London, and as you said, filmmaker and scholar. And mashallah, he's continuing to make maximum use of the life that Creator has given him. And we're very happy to have this opportunity at the Snowbird Institute to listen to him. Sir, you are also holding the Ibn Khaldun chair. And I know that you will give your own talk, but when you do that, if you can also bring in the theory that Ibn Khaldun, the great, I would say, sociologist, political scientist, historian that he was, and people have used his studies to see how the empires and the dynasties have risen and then like living organisms. So, but this topic that you have chosen and would be very interesting because here it is not just one empire or dynasty or great power which is rising, but it is also at the same time the rise of one power, which is United States, which has been prevalent, and then we saw a rise of China as another power, and then there are several more. So I think it's a very interesting topic, and where does Islam sit in all of this? I think we are very, very excited to listen to you, sir. The floor is yours, sir, now.
Thank you so much, Excellency. First of all, let me thank you as chairman of the Snowbird Institute. Let me thank Dr. Qamar Cheema, and I am honored and delighted to be with you, two giants in the field. And Ambassador Chaudhry, as you know, I'm a great fan of yours. You've been a great, I would say, a great international figure, not just a great Pakistani figure, and really, to me, a symbol of Renaissance within the Muslim world. So I'm honored to be with you on this program. Now, in terms of this topic of ours, I agree it is a very important topic, and I'm discussing this with you in terms of exploring the topic, not coming with final answers, because there are no final answers in this, as you know, as a political scientist. I've been looking at this problem, quote unquote problem, in terms of both a social scientist, a historian, and a Muslim. So I'm stepping back and saying, here we are in the 21st century, and I look at the world today. What are the great global theories that explain the world that we have today? There's Mearsheimer, John Mearsheimer and his theories. of the great power politics. There's Huntington, and there are many others. And you mentioned Ibn Khaldun, and that is one point I'll come back to later. So when I look at these theories, I ask myself, where is Islam? And then I look at Muslim world, and the Muslim world, to me, consists of, on one level, almost 2 billion people, almost 60 nations with a lot of wealth, lot of power, especially the Arab world. Of course, you have these great countries in the Far East, Indonesia, Malaysia, and so on. In the Middle East, you have Turkey, and Pakistan at one stage was in that category of a growing power. Now, I ask myself, that is on one level. On another level, realistically, and Mearsheimer emphasized realism. Realistically, I also see Muslim communities and societies being wiped out, like the Rohingya. They've actually been wiped out of the Rakhine state from their history, beginning there, and then in the end, they've almost disappeared. We have many, many examples. We are seeing what's happening in Gaza right now. We are seeing thousands, not a few hundred, children and women being slaughtered. And we're also seeing the silence, or I would say the indifference of people internationally and in the Muslim world. I think the most telling comment is that from the Muslim world, we see virtually nothing. In fact, I think this is going to be one of the great events in history when historians will be asking a lot of questions. And yet we see many examples like this in the Middle East. You have Syria and Iraq and Yemen. There's starvation in Sudan, where 10 million people are displaced. So on that other level, I'm seeing a lot of anguish, anxiety, and turbulence in the Muslim. So I'm trying to now work in terms of where do these theories fit us. So if you take Mearsheimer, and you both of you know Mearsheimer as experts in the field, the professor at Chicago, and Excellency, since you left, he's become very, very prominent in American media, especially since the Gaza 6 months, 8 months, he's become very prominent. He's taking very bold positions. He completely unambiguously attacks Israel for what it's doing in Gaza. He supports, he condemns the West for the Ukraine situation. He blames entirely the West, not Putin. And then, of course, he wrote this famous book that's gained him a lot of controversy, notoriety, but also a lot of support, called the Israel Lobby in the United States. All this is made him very prominent. My question is, how does this theory of his, the great power politics, explain us, Muslim world? Now, what are the great powers? The United States, and he clearly points out that its great days when it was the superior, central, single superpower have gone. Those days have gone. It is no longer the sole superpower. It has declined from that time in the early 2000s, and it is one of the hegemons. He calls them hegemons. So there's the US, still a hegemon, no doubt about it. There's China, the emerging hegemon. He calls it the peer hegemon. That means a hegemon that can compete with the major hegemon. There's Russia, and he includes India as an emerging hegemon. Now, within these hegemons, ask ourselves, where is the Muslim world, and where for us in Pakistan, specifically Pakistan? Now, you've been foreign secretary. Your concern, of course, is this country and this region. So you'll see the hegemons in two cases very directly, China and India very directly involved with Pakistan. And the other two hegemons, is Russia and America, are indirectly involved with Pakistan. So a very, very difficult situation with Pakistan, and it has to tread very carefully between these hegemons. What is the answer? Now, you mentioned Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun's whole thesis is based on the cyclical pattern of dynasties and empires. That empires go up, and then after 3 or 4 generations, they start going down. And he has an explanation. Now, unlike Mearsheimer, Ibn Khaldun presents a thesis. His thesis is these fresh communities, tribesmen, people from the deserts and mountains come down with what he called asabiya, community feeling, social feeling, and they take over the cities and are dominant. But 2-3 generations later, they themselves become what he calls effete and corrupted, and they become vulnerable to the fresher tribesmen coming from the hills. This is a kind of pattern. It's not 100% literal, but it is a pattern explaining history. In Islam, Excellency, you also have other great names. You've got Nizamul Mulk's Siyasatnama. Early on, at the start of Islamic history, of Hazrat Ali himself with his famous book. And I'm very, very impressed by it because it's giving us the principles of good governance. How should people be governed? What are the duties of the administrator? They are all there. There's a very strong moral compass to how people should be governed. Now, if you ask the great political scientists of today, like Cheema, this is more or less missing. And this is my as a scholar, this is my big observation, that they need to actually involve and include these great Muslim social scientists, because without them, they're not able to fully understand the Muslim world. And that's why their understanding is very, very limited. Let me give you a live example. If you visit a museum, next time you're in London, go and see the British Museum or any great museum, and look at the panel of history, the timeline of history, and you'll see it begins with the Greeks. So this is how human history begins. The Greeks, goes on to the Romans, then there's the Dark Ages, almost 1,000 years of Dark Ages. Then the Renaissance, Enlightenment, Western civilization, and the takeoff of the West, colonialism, imperialism. And that's how history is and comes to us. Now, I ask myself, where is the golden age of Islam? Where's the 1,000 years of Islam where Islamic scientists and scholars and astronomers and mathematicians were at the cutting edge of their disciplines? And the answer is they are there, what the West is calling the Dark Ages. So the Dark Ages, in fact, were the very much enlightened ages as far as the Muslim world is concerned. Now, why has this been left out? I think the answer is partly that we haven't been active enough. Muslim scholars need to be aware of history. I don't think they pay much attention to history. And don't forget, Excellency, your Ibn Khaldun was a historian primarily. And then on the West, you have, you could say, a general ignorance, a general maybe some prejudice, maybe some indifference, maybe some attempt to dismiss the Muslim world and say, well, as Edward Said has pointed out in Orientalism, that Western scholars tended to, not all of them, I want to emphasize that, but tended to dismiss scholarship in the Muslim world and the Muslim world generally as backward, as violent, as misogynist. All these factors begin to shape an idea of Islam. So coming back to Cheema, a great social scientist, a political scientist like Cheema has to take this into account. We go on to Huntington, the other great name that is now very dominant in political science in the West. Now, as you know, after 9/11, Huntington and his thesis, The Clash of Civilization, became the main filter through which to understand the world. So people asked, if you remember the famous question President Bush asked, why do they hate us? He assumed the Muslim world or the Muslims hated America. He said, why do they hate us? And the answer was, for the media, they're looking around for the answer, and they found Huntington's thesis that there's a clash of civilizations. There has always been a clash of civilizations, and there always will be a clash of civilizations. It is the West versus Islam / China / Russia / India. All these Eastern powers are also included in this clash. This is very interesting because in time, Huntington's thesis was restricted and reduced to the West versus Islam. Now, that thesis, which became dominant after 9/11, and I was very much involved in debates, one of the few Muslim scholars who's debated both Bernard Lewis, who originated this thesis, The Clash of Civilization, and Huntington. This thesis has not gone away. Many, many scholars, media people, media commentators still adhere to this thesis. So we need to, in this discussion, keep these bigger global ideas in mind in our debate, which we often don't, because I know our debates are more focused locally and nationally, and we don't understand that there are much bigger forces at play which do affect us and will continue to affect us and have their own points of view.
Very good. I think it was great. Qamar, unless you want to say something, I want to take up. I remember the Huntington theory when it came Clash of Civilizations. There were many who did not really agree to that because it somehow felt that they are in a perpetual conflict, and whereas according to the Chinese Confucianism, this is not the sum all of all that is happening through the times and through the ages. There have been now theories like the Chinese would say that there should be a win-win where all can engage, but it is getting a big challenge from the great power politics which has come in. Now, I want to understand the link between the civilizations, clash of civilizations, and clash of nation states, because these are two very different things. I would also say that Christianity or Christian world versus the Muslim world, I can understand that. But I don't understand Western powers or certain Eastern powers combining against Muslim world or Islam per se. So if you can just decipher that for me, the civilization part and the great power politics, the nation states part.
Excellent question. So it's a very, very good question, very sharp question. And I can see that your interest and training as a top level diplomat has made you think about this issue. It is very, very important. Now, I want to say to this that we have to be very careful about these terms and definitions and also these theories. I want to very quickly expand that and say that we take Huntington as if he's the final word, or now Mearsheimer, who's very popular, as I said, in the media and on campuses. But also in the 90s, which when Huntington writes his Clash of Civilizations, you had other political scientists. You had Fukuyama. He's talking about the end of history. So he says Western democracy has won, history is over, it's finished, that's it. You also had President Khatami of Iran, who came to the United Nations in the late 90s and proposed the dialogue of civilizations. That's often forgotten, but he did propose that, and that was a great idea where people could, civilizations could actually understand each other, have dialogue. There were other scholars like Karen Armstrong who were promoting the idea of dialogue through compassion. And you also had, and I think this is something you should put on the table, millions of people, not just a few, actually passionately believing in and promoting the idea of end times. Now, the theory of end times was that the world, human society, Homo sapien is coming to an end. And very soon we'll all be extinguished, we'll disappear. Some of us will go to hell, some of us will go to heaven. And you brought up the Christian dimension. It will be the good Christians who believe in the end times, the evangelists who will go to heaven. The rest of us will all go to hell, according to that theory. So there are many competing theories. Now, your question is very relevant because where do Muslim nations/states fit into all this, and in terms of civilizations? Now, the first point is, and this is where Huntington falls, his is such a deterministic and simplistic version of history that it can easily be challenged. An undergraduate can challenge it. First of all, there is no such thing as West versus the East. You have millions of Muslims, not just a few, millions living in the West. You now have the mayor of London is a Muslim. You have Muslim congressmen here in the United States. You have mayors. You have very major media figures who are Muslim living in the West. So they are not going to line up with this West versus Islam because they're Muslim, maybe American Muslims or British Muslim, but they're still Muslim. So that dimension changes the clash of civilizations theory. Then the deterministic aspect of Huntington means that his own theory falls on the basis of his own interpretation of history. And I've always found it a very poor interpretation of history. What I find a bit more convincing is Mearsheimer, because he constantly talks about realism. He's talking, in fact, he talks offensive realism. As now for a country like Pakistan, he's saying, look, if you have these hegemons, like Pakistan has India on one side, emerging hegemon, and China on the other side, then Pakistan must, according to Qamar Cheema, I'm applying his theory, must have a strong defense. It must have unity within its borders. It must have a strong economy in order to withstand the pressures of the hegemon. Now, things have changed in India after the elections, and we hope there'll be a thaw and a better relation between the two countries. And I know that both of you are very actively involved in promoting better relations, and we hope and pray for that. But if that doesn't happen, Pakistan must start going down the list and check them off. For example, unity. Now, when you're talking about political unity, and you actually have one of the most popular political leaders of Pakistan, a hero. Imran Khan's a hero to all of us. I know I can't say his name, so I'm not sure it'll be blocked out, but I'm just pointing out that, and I'm not talking politically, I'm talking in terms of nation and nationhood. If you have political divisions, you have an economy which is struggling very seriously, you have a sense of, and I'm finding this in Pakistan, a sense of pessimism and gloom, which I find very strange, that to the point that even the Americans who were playing cricket for the first time beat Pakistan, which left me, and I know many Pakistanis, in a state of shock. You really need a rejuvenation, because if that doesn't happen, according to Qamar Cheema, Pakistan will be in trouble. So here's the thesis of Qamar Cheema being applied to Pakistan. Now, what is the challenge for you, the intellectuals? The challenge really is to talk to the leaders, the policymakers of Pakistan. Excellency, how many Pakistani cabinet ministers or political leaders have engaged with the ideas of Qamar Cheema or Huntington or Khatmi or Fukuyama? So, because unless they're engaging with those ideas, they have no idea what these ideas are. They're just going to say, I dismiss them. I don't need these ideas. And we know that in the real world, we are falling far behind in terms of intellectual interaction and engagement. We need to be able to answer these, and we have very rich answers. As a historian, I can say I'm fascinated by Muslim history, Muslim culture, whether it's in South Asia, whether it's in the Middle East. And we have to constantly go back to that, not to repeat history, but to...
So I have a question. So my question is that we have spoken about the Western scholars who are explaining international system, Francis Fukuyama. We have heard about the Daniel Pipes. We have heard about Huntington, Mearsheimer. All these people are talking about international system. So which modern Islamic scholars do you believe they explain the international system? Do we really understand the Islamic system, particularly if we just divide the Muslim world in three blocks, maybe the Arabs, the Persians, or the Turks, maybe these three blocks who are trying to dominate the Muslim world? So who are basically the people who understand the international system, or who are trying to make these three major Islamic blocks to tell us where this international system is going and where we have to go? Because just today I was looking that there is a D8 summit going on in Turkey. So the Arabs are having their own process for engaging with the Gaza. So the Turks are having their own process in the shape of D8, how to talk about Gaza and the humanitarian crisis. So which Islamic scholars explain international system like Daniel Pipes or like Huntington, Scheimer and others?
Dr. Saab, the simple answer is scholars like you, Izaz Chaudhry, you are in the field, you are active, you are engaging. I'm talking about stepping back and looking at the same issue and problem historically. First of all, the notion of blocks, I don't think can be applied, because you're seeing, you talked about the Arab world, South Asia, Middle East. These are not even viable. They haven't formed into any blocks. And I joined the civil service of Pakistan in the 60s. And I know that as a young officer, I had great pride in Pakistan, because I saw around me the reality. This is not something I was dreaming. Pakistan stretched in one way conceptually from Turkey through Iran onto the borders of Burma. So Pakistan spanned literally two continents. And we had that sense of pride that we are moving. The World Bank was saying that this is going to be the next emergent economy in the world. I still remember when President Ayub went to Washington, and there was a state dinner for him in Mount Vernon, and Chaudhry Sahib will explain the significance of Mount Vernon. That's the home of Washington. And the fact that he was received at the Dulles airport by President Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy, his wife. And then Jackie Kennedy came to Pakistan, and she was the honored guest of the president. And in an open car, she drove through Lahore to the stadium, and thousands of Pakistanis surrounded the car and threw flower petals at the car. Then she went to the Khyber Pass and received a very warm welcome. I remember all this because all this gave me, as a young Pakistani, a great sense of identity. And I felt that this was a nation that will fulfill its destiny. Remember, Quaid-e-Azam kept saying, if you do these things, he gave a whole list of things, lack of corruption, work hard, discipline, then you will become, Pakistan will become one of the great nations of the world. So you cannot do one thing and expect different results. So when you ask for blocks, those are against that. That's again Western thinking in terms of these are blocks and these are Eastern blocks and Western blocks. And scholars have their own way of lumping us together. I really think, in one sense, there is a sense of community in the Muslim world. For example, what's happening in Gaza, I know, would affect Muslims throughout the world. I don't see any Muslims who would not be affected by it. But how active they'll be, how they can coordinate, how they can respond, you're seeing the results. There's virtually no practical response. So, and that's why you may have these different regional responses. So there are many problems to move forward, and unless we identify them on a national level within the context of international thinking, we still have a long way to go.
Dr. I'm still struggling to find the link between Islam and the Muslim world. Because when I lived through it, the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Conference, it was being reformed some 2 decades ago. And when they were trying to reform it, they, one idea was that let's convert it as Organization of Islamic Countries. I mean, you can't have Organization of Islamic Conference. So, Organization of Islamic Countries. But most Islamic countries opposed it. And they said, no, we are Muslim country, but we are not an Islamic country. So the ethnic factors, the race factors, they dominated. So if you'd say Muslim world, yes, it may be 60 countries, but they have their own separate identity. They don't really view themselves through the lens of Islam. So it's not really Islam versus the West, because all these countries follow their own system. It's not the kind of caliphate that used to exist. It's a very different world now. So how in this age, should the Muslim world cope with what's going on and recreate their place? I'm not saying Islam, because Islam will then, will be pitched against, let's say, Christianity or Judaism or Hinduism, etc. It's the Muslim world was the, let's say, Western world or the Chinese world or the Indian world. So when the topic says Whither Islam, it becomes very difficult for me to figure out what is it that we can do with regard to, Pakistan likes to be identified as an Islamic country. We have our name, Islamic Republic. But most of the Muslim world doesn't. So in that sense, they apparently don't owe to the world of Islam what we feel. So how does it all figure out?
Joseph, excellent question, and again a very pertinent question, and a question that doesn't apply only to Islam. It also applies to, for example, Christianity. As you know, you lived in America, that today something like 50%, especially the younger generation, have, in a sense, rejected religion. So they don't define themselves as Christian. which is a very interesting phenomenon because we still see the West in terms of Christian societies. In Europe, there's a similar tendency towards secularism. So I agree with you that just simply saying Islam and defining all Muslim nations as Islamic will immediately pose problems. I'll tell you how I have explored this very question. I have explored it through what I'm calling the theory of the ilm ethos. I'm arguing, and it's a slightly complicated theory, that Islam's success, now go back to the 7th century. Islam comes from the deserts of Arabia. There's nothing there, and suddenly you have Islam. And who has entered the Middle East? This young general, Khalid bin Walid. And within a year, I want your audience to understand the spectacular nature of what he did. Within a year, he toppled the Persian Empire, the Sassanid, turned around within the same year and toppled the Roman Empire, the Byzantine. So in a year, Khalid bin Walid had toppled the two superpowers, the hegemons of their time. Now, having done that, suddenly Islam found itself coming out of the desert from being a nothing civilization. Remember, Saudi Arabia or Arabia then didn't have big cities, it didn't have a Taj Mahal, it didn't have university, it was a desert. Suddenly Islam was, within a century, in charge of countries and nations and tribes from Spain, Andalusia, right up to the Sindh in South Asia. So what is it to do with these peoples? This is where the ilm ethos theory is applied. That the first rulers, the great Abdul Rahman in Cordoba, as an example, he instituted the ilm ethos, which meant the emphasis, as was ordered by the Prophet of Islam, emphasized knowledge, ilm, gathering ilm for every individual. So it avoids this question, Dr. Saab, of Islam and whether you're Islamic or whether you have much of a Muslim, you're saying prayers 5 times and being very rigid in your rituals. But as a scholar acquiring knowledge, you could be Muslim, you could be Jewish, you could be an atheist, but you're acquiring knowledge because that is God's command to you. And again, the Quran emphasizes this, and ilm is the second most used word in the Quran. So this is the Prophet. The second item was adl, or justice. So the ruler has to provide justice to his people. That is a command of God. Adl, the name of God, adl. And the third feature was ihsan, or compassion, or balance. These 3 qualities and features had to, and they connect to each other, had to be exhibited in society to create an ethos. From this ethos came all those great scientists and scholars and mathematicians and philosophers and thrived. And in those scholars, there were Muslims, there were Jews, there were Christians, because they were all in pursuit of this ethos, which created that society. And it's again, not just something I'm saying as a Muslim scholar. Cordoba, which was the leading city of Europe then, had 93 libraries, and the main library had 600,000 books, when the greatest library of Europe, in Christian Europe, had, I think, 60 books. So this whole ethos was to promote. And you had pictures, and this, by the way, also was taking place in Baghdad and further east. This picture of the Caliph, the ruler of Andalusia, coming to the Grand Mosque, which he had created, is a magnificent building, coming to the mosque, sitting in a corner after the prayers, surrounded by students, by travelers, talking about, just like you're talking, what is Islam? How do you define Islam? Where are we going? Whither Islam? These are questions that the Caliph or the ruler was engaged in. And this would happen again and again and again. I can give you many, many examples. Sultan Salahuddin, the most famous, legendary ruler of the Middle East, who recaptured Jerusalem from the Crusaders. When he died, he had 1 saddle, 1 sword, and 1 Quran. Now, Excellency, compare this to our rulers and our Salahuddins of this today's Islam, where they loot the country, they move it abroad, and they have no feeling for people. So without these 3 features that the ilm ethos defined, in practice, Muslims will no longer be defined as Muslims. So that avoids the question of how you define them in religious terms, but you define them in terms of behavior. So I think what we need to promote is a rediscovery of these virtues and these features in our society, and particularly in the leadership.
I think this is a great idea. It's a great idea, and we certainly lack uh, in emphasis on knowledge, compassion, balance. I'm very sure about it. But not only me, but also many other Muslim nations. What still bothers me, and it's a good opportunity for me to talk to a person like you who has rendered such a great service to the world of Islam and to the name Islam itself, is that in most of the Muslim worlds, the ethnic identity is asserted. It's the most dominant feature. I remember, as a student, I read that advent of Islam in the subcontinent, and we read about it that Muhammad bin Qasim came, and then when I went to live in Cairo for some years, and I noticed that they would call it Arab conquest of India, then India. So it was a totally different perspective from my side, because they thought of themselves as Arabs. In fact, Egyptians would say that we are Africans, and then we are Egyptians, and then we are Muslims or Coptics or Jew or whatever. Similarly, it's Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It's not Kingdom of Islamic Arabia, and all and so on. So sometimes I feel that to bundle all the world of Islam together as one group is perhaps misleading, because as you said, within a certain nationality, you will have people of various faiths, various religions, and so if you can just clarify this for me a little bit, because that will help me.
Excellency, again, you've raised a fundamental question, very important. I go back to the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. If you remember, he brings Islam to the world. Islam is a universal philosophy. Again and again, Islam emphasizes universality. God is the God of the universes, in the plural. Again and again, God emphasizes we made you into different colors, different languages, different shapes. God says, I could have made you all in the same mold, but I made you in different shapes and sizes. Because something new is coming. It's a universal philosophy. Now, you've raised the question of why do we emphasize ethnicity? The Prophet understood the dangers of ethnicity to his new faith. And he repeated again and again that you do not belong to the Quraysh or the Hashemites. You are Muslim, which is an abstract concept. And as a Muslim, you can relate to a Hindu or a Christian or a Jewish because they are also believers, or they are also looking for a universal vision. And if they can come out of their shell, you can come out of your shell because you are universal. Now, there's a hadith, if you recall, of the Prophet, in which he says, there is no Bedouinism in Islam. My God, that's your clear charter. And then go to his last address at Arafat, his last famous address just before he passed away. What did he say? There is no black over white. There's no white over black. There's no Arab over non-Arab. It's crystal clear. So when your Arab friends or Pakistani friends talk about ethnicity, they are in fact challenging their own identity as Muslims. So they are asserting their ethnicity over Islam, and they're losing. They're losing because they have a very rich and very powerful legacy which they're setting aside and saying, no, I'm only an Arab, or I'm only... And the Prophet has said there's no Arab and there's no non-Arab. You'll be judged by the action, by the goodness of your action, which is the ilm ethos. You'll be judged by how good or bad a scholar you are, how good or bad human being you are. Essence is about being a good human being. And that's why, Excellency, think about it. And I'm talking very rationally on the basis of evidence and fact. That is why Salahuddin, think of it, Salahuddin retakes Jerusalem from the Crusaders at the height of the clash, the West, Europe versus the Muslim world. He takes Jerusalem back. And how does he behave? He orders all prisoners, Christian prisoners, to be released on ransom, which was the custom of the time. Most of them are very poor, they don't have money. He pays for them from his own estate. The mind boggles. And then he finds out that the Jews have been expelled by the Romans. He allows them back into Jerusalem. This is Salahuddin. And as a result, if you look up literature, Western literature, Salahuddin is treated as a hero. He's like a superhero in Western literature. Even Dante, who, as you know, wrote the Inferno, which is one of the classics of European literature. And it's a very Christian, very Catholic interpretation of history. Even he places Salahuddin in a very high status. So why was that happening? Because the world recognizes a man like Salahuddin. They don't say he's a Muslim. Well, he's a very successful general, he did great work, but he's a great human being. And what ilm ethos does is, Excellency, think about it. It moves the discussion from Islam as a religion to a human being. Because if you stick to this other definition, which you said, the ethnic definition, then you know Quaid-e-Azam, the man, the hero who created Pakistan, almost single-handedly, he was being attacked. He was constantly being attacked. He doesn't have a beard. He doesn't dress like the Muslims. He doesn't behave like the Muslims. The man who gave a nation to the Muslims of South Asia, literally like Moses did for the Middle East, he is attacked on that basis. So you have to think of yourself and say, what do we identify as true behavior according to the ilm ethos, what we have got as Muslims? And I think it's a very rich legacy we have. We need to understand it and revive it. And if you read Iqbal, and if you read these great philosophers, Dr. Qamar asked about the philosophers, someone like Iqbal, he's constantly talking about the same thing, Mard-e-Momin, and going back. He's not talking of Mard-e-Momin in religious terms. He's talking in terms of humanism and spiritualism. And that is, I think, the figure that will appeal to the whole world in our interactions with the world. And we must interact with the world, because Islam is an expansive, embracing philosophy of life, not a restrictive and exclusive one.
So I have a question, and that question is about, since we're talking about the great power politics, so my question is that how do you see this transformation in the Middle East? That why Middle East is reforming itself without reforming or sensitizing the Muslim world? Because particularly if you just look at Vision 2030, how the reforms are coming in Saudi Arabia, and how this this Abraham Accord. So there is a reforms and within the Middle East or within the Arab world, but without sensitizing the Islamic world that in which direction we want to go.
Well, this is, Dr. Saab, as you know, top-down reform, and it doesn't get you very far. Pakistan has tried that regularly. The bureaucrats in Islamabad will impose a reform, and nothing happens down below. I've been a deputy commissioner in the field, and I know that unless it comes down to that level, the village level, the district level, the Thana level, things don't change. So this is what's happening in the Arab world. Now look at the Arab world, step back and look at it. And you see there's a major crisis in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Somalia. This is the Arab world. And the Saudis are very courageously forcing a kind of reformation on their society. Where that ends, I don't know. As a social scientist, I would say that whenever you had these attempts to force a society, there's always a backlash. And no better example than Turkey itself. Turkey, if you remember, swung from one extreme to another. The pendulum went one way, pendulum went another way. So societies have to understand that things move at their own pace. And you give them a direction and let society itself move in that direction. That's why leadership becomes so important. Leadership is to be defined. And I go back to my ilm ethos. Unless the leadership has an idea of respect for knowledge, respect for justice, respect for compassion, leadership is going to fail. See, knowledge itself, education, every leader of Pakistan, from Quaid-e-Azam to Allama Iqbal, everyone talked about education. The Prophet talks again and again of education. Yet you see, we are constantly amazed, and rightly so, at the achievements of India. And India's emphasis on education, all the problems they have with the Muslims, they're almost obsessed in their antipathy to Muslims. And I hope that it change now with the change of the elections. But their obsession aside, their achievements in education and setting up the best institutes of excellence and promoting education has meant that 2 generations after Nehru created these centers, you have the CEOs, and Excellency will give you a better figure than I can, but the CEOs of, I think, 2 or 3 dozen American enterprises, all Indian. It's not that anyone is doing a favor to them. It's because they're seen as outstanding and as excellent. Why did that happen? Now compare this to the education we have in Pakistan. Again, I was educated and I was very proud of my education. But today I find a lot of youngsters who are keen to be educated. Pakistanis are very, very bright. They're very frustrated because they don't have that kind of schooling and colleges that they should have in order for them to be a nation which can then compete with the world. 220, 230 million people, and look at the education, particularly in Balochistan, in the tribal areas, what were the tribal areas in the frontier province, and in the so-called provinces that are outside the Punjab. Punjab does have some very good facilities, but the other provinces don't.
Can I take you to India, where 200 million or so Muslims live, and a secular India would accommodate them, but lately there were trends to cast them as infiltrators, as outsiders, who came and plundered India's wealth. So the BJP, was in a way pitched against those Indians who felt that a pluralistic India would be a better India. And I remember they would say, Ishwar Allah Tero Naam Sabko Sukmati De Bhagwan. So they were sort of talking of a universal spirit for India, which has now been sort of compromised. We don't know where it all ends, although, as you initially remarked, some kind of trepidation has now taken place, and hopefully India would not move in the direction in which Mr. Modi wanted to take it, because that would have surely meant a big clash within the Indian society. How do you see, how should Pakistani Muslims identify with the Indian Muslims? Should they at all?
Very difficult question, Choudhary Sahab, and a painful one, because if you read the speeches of Quaid-e-Azam, he was very conscious that they were, in fact, the Muslims who were going to be left behind. They couldn't all come to what was Pakistan in 1947. So he constantly expressed his respect for them, his gratitude for them, and his expression of thank you for them, for the Pakistan movement. Now, India faces, as I see it, and I've written on this and I've thought about it, really a much more existentialist crisis than we do in Pakistan. Because India has 2 choices. It has the classic Hinduism, Sanskritic philosophy of Shanti, peace, Kshama, forgiveness, Ahimsa, non-violence. And these are great virtues. These are, again, universal philosophies, great virtues, where you can connect to whether you're a Muslim or a Christian. But opposed to this, India has also now cultivated very strongly fascistic tendencies, where these Indians believe that Hinduism should be a reflection of Hitler's Nazis in Europe, and that the minorities, and by the way, this is not Modi saying it alone. Go back to the literature of the 1920s. It's being written by them. Golwalkar actually writes this in We or Our Nationhood. Definey actually writes this. He says, if Hitler could wipe out the Jews, why can't we do the same to the Muslims? So this is the other fascistic India that began to emerge after the independence of India. But figures like Nehru kept it in check. Today, with Modi as Prime Minister, this has been given full backing, official backing. And you get some shocking examples. Christians are being slaughtered and raped and killed in East India. Muslims are being constantly lynched and beaten and hacked to death. And videos are then circulated. We've all seen these videos. Now, your question, how should we react? Any Pakistani seeing this would be shocked and say, my goodness, this is happening across the border. And secondly, if that Pakistani had any intelligence, should be saying, my God, had it not been for Quaid-e-Azam, I may have been in that position. And this is, George Sahib, I want to make a point to you as an intellectual of Pakistan. I'm seeing so many Pakistani intellectuals openly criticizing Quaid-e-Azam quite fatuously. No reason. They just suddenly, oh, we are so great. Quaid-e-Azam was nonsense. He didn't do anything. He messed it all up. They really have to be given a ticket to go to India, spend a week there on all expenses paid visit, and come back then and then make this comment, because literally this is what Pakistani should be thinking, that above all, Mr. Jinnah gave Pakistan independence and freedom. And you're seeing in the Middle East where the Palestinians who are from that soil, from that land, cannot have 1 square inch of freedom because another power has now dominated them. They cannot get out of it. Quaid-e-Azam gave complete freedom to this nation. And in 1947, Pakistan was the largest Muslim nation in the world. And again, he repeated, take this up, take this nation to the stars, create wonders with this nation. So I don't think we should be simply seeing the negative side. We should be saying, we have got this, we have preserved it, let us make this into a nation we can be proud of. And George Sahib, as you know, I've served in Balochistan, in the frontier, in what was East Pakistan. It's a beautiful land with wonderful people, very dynamic people, each community with a lot of optimism and hope. And I'm always impressed by the optimism of the ordinary Pakistani, who now is in despair with the politics of Pakistan. We need to bring them back and give them hope and let them then take this nation forward. Because the consequences, and you raise Mershimer, the consequences of Mershimer's thesis are that smaller nations living by hegemons will not survive. That is why he argues that Ukraine was a disaster. That is why he argues that Putin is going to punish Ukraine and destroy it before he leaves it. Putin is not going to leave and is not going to be defeated. So we have to take lessons from that. We have to take lessons from Gaza and ask ourselves, what are we going to do with this nation that we have? Instead of which, I'm seeing constantly whining, whinging of Pakistani intellectuals attacking Quaid-e-Azam, attacking Pakistan, ye nahi hai, wo nahi hai. Fine, if things are bad, improve them, do something with them, but don't constantly undermine your own position.
That's very good. Qamar, if you don't have a question, I still want to raise one more issue.
So you can ask the question and then we can wrap it up, sir.
All right. You see, Pakistan is neighbored on the west by 2 Muslim countries, Afghanistan and Iran. With Afghanistan, we have very difficult relationship. With Iran, we have border issues. On our east is India, which is basically Hindu-dominant country. We don't have good relations, that's for sure, because of history. But with China, which is a communist state, but we have good relations. And this Pakistani identity, in a way, has overtaken our Islamic identity. Do you see any contradiction in these 2 identities?
George Sahib, I see it like this, that Pakistanis have several identities struggling within themselves. And again, I'm speaking both as a scholar and a practitioner. Everywhere I go, you have these, for example, say in the frontier province, the old frontier province, Pakhtun society, very hospitable people, very welcoming people, but they're also proud of their culture. The Baloch are the same. And yet they feel that they've been colonized by their fellow Punjabis coming from Islamabad. So that feeling of resentment is very strong. And other nations in the area have exploited that so that they begin to feel that, well, all right, why don't you become independent? So just break off. So there is a crisis. We can't pretend there isn't a crisis. How do you cope with it? My answer is that Pakistanis should cultivate what they have in essence, which is their own natural sense of friendship and hospitality. Pakistanis have that. I know many foreigners who come to Pakistan, come back and they rave about Pakistani hospitality and friendship. Let Pakistanis develop that. Let them become friends. These 2 nations you pointed out, Afghanistan and Iran, potentially they are close friends and allies. They're brothers, potentially. But in the reality is we have very bad relations with them. India also, there's so much mutual history with India. You quoted Ishwar and Allah. That's Gandhi's favorite verse. Mahatma Gandhi loved to recite that all the time. when there was a book being written on the Holy Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, Gandhi wrote the foreword to that. Just think of it. So there's much that can be built up. And how can it be built up? When we should meet our neighbors with confidence, reach out on the east, reach out on the west, and not be involved in these very petty. And at times it becomes very, very petty that they tease or harass a clerk from the embassy, and then we do it to them and they do it to us. And that becomes a big issue. And I know that you have been a champion in the Foreign Office dealing with these issues. But we need to, again, look more philosophically. There's so much in common. Afghan culture and Pakistan culture are intermeshed. Iranian culture and Pakistan culture intermeshed. Your Mughal culture was basically Persian culture. And Indians and Hindus and Muslims have been together. What was called the Ganga Jamna culture is very, very deep. Although the BJP tried its best to remove that, and even now the attempt is to depict all Mughals and all Muslims as invaders and rapists and so on. But that has to be challenged, and it can only be challenged if Pakistanis step out of their shell and stop thinking in narrow terms and say, we are a nation, this is our history, this is our culture. We are going out to embrace the world and show people who we are, who we really are. It's something to be proud of, but again, let us show it to the world.
So any other questions, sir, or we can conclude the discussion?
Well, sir, if you have any closing thoughts on the topic itself, it would be great, and then we can, of course, wrap it up.
My closing thoughts are, Judge Sahab, I knew that this was going to be a great session, and I knew that a combination of you and Dr. Cheema are going to give me a tough time. You asked some really good questions and sharp questions and really academic questions, and I only hope now that viewers, not only Pakistani, other viewers, see this in the context of what we are saying and how we are saying it, and appreciate that our aim is to promote dialogue, friendship, and understanding, to build bridges. And I think if other people join us for that and extend their hand, we always extend a hand in friendship. I think that is the biggest message that our discussion could extract. And so thank you very much. I'm really grateful to both of you. Chaudhry Sahab, as you know, you're one of my heroes, and I'm always very proud of what you're doing. And Dr. Qamar, thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Likewise, you are a highly esteemed person for us, for Pakistan, for America. You are a universal personality, mashallah.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you.
Yes, sir, absolutely right. On this note, very rich academic discussion we had with you, sir. Thank you very much for sparing the time for the Snowbird Institute on this excellent topic. And I think the academicians, professors, scholars, diplomats, journalists, civil society, whoever will watch this conversation, they will draw their conclusions. Thank you very much, Qamar Cheema Saab and Ambassador Azaz Ahmed Chaudhry Saab.
Thank you. Thank you.